So it's not exactly that traffic through the Strait of Hormuz collapsed. Traffic collapsed, yes, but that is the easy half of the story, and everybody has reported it. The part nobody is looking at is where the ships that are still moving have gone. Because if you pull up a density map of the Strait right now, you see two dense ribbons of traffic pressed against the northern and southern edges, and running between them, down the exact middle, a corridor that is essentially empty. That empty corridor is the international shipping lane. It is the route the entire world agreed to use, and it has been abandoned. Nobody announced that. There was no notice to mariners saying the center of Hormuz is now closed for business. It happened by accumulation, one master at a time, and by the time you can see it on a heat map, the decision has already been made permanent by everybody who matters. That is what I want to walk through, because the shape of that map tells you more about who actually controls this waterway than any statement out of Tehran or Washington. If you are new to the channel, take a moment, subscribe, and hit the bell so these come to you as they go up. And tell me where you are watching from, because I want to know how many of you are in countries that ship through this strait and how much of this has reached your local news at all. Drop it in the comments. Let's orient ourselves here before we get into this. A strait is not open water. In a waterway this narrow and this heavily used, traffic runs on an agreed structure called a traffic separation scheme. Think of it as a motorway drawn on the sea. There is an inbound lane, an outbound lane, and a separation zone between them, so that ships doing 12 to 16 knots in opposite directions do not meet head-on in a channel with limited room to maneuver. In Hormuz, that scheme sits in the middle of the strait. It has sat there for decades. It is on every chart, every passage plan, every bridge team's standing routine. When I say ships use the center of the strait, I mean that the center of the strait is where the legal, charted, insured route physically is. Now look at the current picture. Since February 28th, traffic has restructured onto two informal corridors. There is a northern route running close to the Iranian coast, which Iran uses and permits. There is a southern route running along the northern coast of Oman, which the United States has been using to escort vessels through. And the center, the actual traffic separation scheme, has emptied out. Why? Because advisory charts now mark the central portion of the strait as a mine threat area. I want to slow down on that, because it is the single most consequential fact in this whole situation, and it gets one line in most reporting. A declared mine threat area in the middle of a mandatory international strait is not a warning about a bad neighborhood. Mines do not care about your flag, your cargo, or your intentions. They do not distinguish between a Panamanian flagged bulk carrier and a warship. They are the cheapest weapon in naval warfare and the most expensive one to clean up. A modern mine can be laid from a small vessel in a single night by a crew of a few people, and clearing a suspected field takes specialized ships, months of work, and a level of international cooperation that does not currently exist in that body of water. And here is the operational reality that follows. You do not need to actually mine a strait to close it. You need people to believe you might have. A single credible report is enough to move every commercial master, every charterer, and every underwriter off that water, and none of them will go back until somebody proves the area is clear. Proving a negative across a mine suspect corridor is one of the hardest tasks in naval operations. So the center lane emptied, not by decree. By risk arithmetic done independently on hundreds of bridges. Understand what that leaves. The only two usable routes through this strait now run through somebody's territorial waters and under somebody's protection. To the north, you are in Iranian water, moving with Iranian permission, subject to Iranian clearance procedures. To the south, you are hugging the Omani coast under American naval escort. The neutral, jointly agreed, nobody owns it middle is gone. That is the structural change, and it is much bigger than the traffic count. Now let's talk about what happens on those two remaining lanes, because they are not equally safe, and the numbers here are stark. Since July 6th, the UK Maritime Trade Operations Office recorded 16 projectile strike incidents in this region. 14 of them occurred on the southern Omani route. 14 out of 16. The heat maps show the strikes concentrated in a tight patch of water northeast of the tip of Oman, right where that southern corridor runs. Overall, since February 28th, there have been 28 incidents during Hormuz transits, and across the wider region, 54 incidents, 23 injuries or fatalities, and 3 confirmed total losses of ships. The damage pattern is worth sitting with. Engine rooms are the primary damage location in 11 separate incidents, not cargo tanks. Machinery spaces. You do not strike an engine room to sink a tanker. You strike it to kill propulsion. A vessel not under command in the approaches to a choke point becomes a navigational hazard, a salvage operation, and an insurance claim, and it does not move. That is a deliberate mobility kill, and 11 of them is a pattern, not a run of bad shooting. The behavioral response is in the same report, and it is the detail I keep coming back to. Multiple vessels have aborted planned transits or rerouted north following attacks. The assessment characterizes this as risk avoidance rather than route substitution. Understand the difference, because it is enormous. Route substitution means the trade found another way and the cargo still moves. Risk avoidance means the master turned around and the cargo did not move at all. When the Red Sea got dangerous, ships went around the Cape of Good Hope. That is substitution. It costs time and fuel, but the system absorbs it. There is no going around Hormuz. There is no alternative sea route into or out of the Persian Gulf. It is one entrance. So, when a master aborts a Hormuz transit, that cargo is simply not delivered. And notice the direction of the rerouting. Ships that abort the southern route go north, toward Iranian water, toward the corridor Iran controls and clears. Every strike on the southern lane pushes commercial traffic further into the northern one, which means the strikes are working exactly as a coercion instrument should. This is not random harassment. It is traffic engineering by violence. Now put the 3 lanes side by side and look at what the map is actually saying. The neutral center is unusable because of a mine threat nobody can clear. The southern lane is under American escort and is where 14 of the last 16 strikes landed, which means American protection is currently the marker for being a target. The northern lane is safe because Iran permits it to be safe. Iran did not have to seize the Strait. It made 2/3 of it expensive and left 1/3 open, and traffic did the rest on its own. Look at where transit stood before all this. Normal daily average through Hormuz ran around 138 vessels. On February 28th, the count was above 150. It then dropped to under 20 at the peak of the disruption, and, as of early August, transits detected through Hormuz were down to single digits on some days. Over one recent 7-day period, 18 ships outbound and 21 inbound. Since February 28th, in total, 857 outbound and 593 inbound. Overall, transits detected by AIS are running approximately 90% below pre-conflict baselines. That figure comes from the UK MTO assessment, and it is based on K-Peeler data. And K-Peeler is the group behind marine traffic, so this is the same pipeline feeding the public tracking sites you have looked at. There was a brief recovery in June when an arrangement came into effect, and everybody was optimistic about it. Then Iran began striking vessels that had not obtained what Iran considered proper clearance, and the recovery ended. That sequence matters because it establishes the mechanism. The traffic level in this strait is now a function of Iranian permission rather than of demand, weather, or capacity. That is what controlling a waterway means in practice. And this is why I keep saying, the empty center lane is the headline, and the transit count is the footnote. Traffic figures recover. They go up and down with ceasefires and negotiations, and every uptick generates a round of optimistic coverage. The abandonment of the traffic separation scheme is a structural fact. The moment the mine threat was credible, the legal route stopped existing as a practical option, and it will not come back until somebody runs a full mine countermeasures operation across the Central Strait. That requires an environment permissive enough for slow, vulnerable mine hunters to work for months in water, where cargo ships are being hit in the engine room. We are not close to that. So, here is my read, and I will give it before I ask you for yours. In my opinion, as someone who has spent a career around this trade, the internationally agreed lane through Hormuz is functionally dead, and it was killed by threat rather than by any actual demonstrated minefield. That is the cheapest strategic victory I have seen in this domain. The entire architecture of a mandatory international strait was dismantled without anyone having to prove they did anything, and the world's response was to quietly split into two escorted corridors and carry on. That is the precedent that should worry you. Transit passage through international straits is codified in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and I do not much care that neither Iran nor the United States has ratified it. Enough states have ratified it that it operates as international law, and this is the law of the sea. But a right you cannot physically exercise is not a right. If a coastal state can make the neutral lane unusable, then offer a safe lane through its own waters, and the world adapts by using the offered lane, then the model works and it is repeatable. There are other straits and other coastal states watching how this resolves. So now, I want you to pick a side and be honest about it. Should ship owners keep sending vessels into a strait where the legal lane is a declared mine threat area, and one of the two remaining lanes has absorbed 14 of the last 16 strikes? One position says the trade has to keep flowing, that abandoning the strait hands Iran a permanent win and strands the entire Gulf economy. The other says no cargo is worth putting crews into water where engine rooms are being targeted, and that the only real pressure is a total commercial withdrawal until the strait is genuinely cleared and secured. My own view leans toward the first, because I do not think abandonment ever gets reversed, and I do not think a strait that empties out ever refills on the old terms. But I understand the second position completely, and I am not the one standing the watch. Which one are you? Tell me in the comments, and tell me why. Watch the center lane, not the transit count, not the negotiations, not the statements. The day vessels start voluntarily running the traffic separation scheme again is the day this is genuinely over, and it will show up on a density map before it shows up in any announcement. If you got something out of this, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you get alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to support the page, hit the super thanks button down below. Until the next episode.